Now let's look at writing. These are some good rules to follow in writing and document structure. A very talented writer knows how to break these rules to create an effect. It's kind of like graphic design. There are the principles of contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. It's best to follow those rules, but a very talented graphic artist knows how to break those to be dynamic and create very dynamic images. And the same with writing. You have a Nobel Prize winning author, literary geniuses like James Joyce that just kind of murder the English language, but they do it beautifully. If you're a good writer, you probably don't have to worry about all of this stuff, but if you struggle with it, it's best to follow the rules. And in academic writing, it's best to follow the rules most of the time. So I said if there's only one thing to remember from this lecture, it would be how I define critical thought and analysis. If there are only two things to remember, it would be how I define critical thought and analysis and this about writing. Whenever you write something, do it this way. Tell me what you're going to tell me. Introduction. Tell me. Body. Tell me what you told me. Use a strong thesis statement in your introduction to tell me what you're going to tell me. When a train of thought ends, start a new paragraph. And when a set of ideas end, insert a subheading to introduce those ideas. This breaks the information up and makes it easier to assimilate for the audience, for the reader. Again, these aren't scholastic hoops I'm making you jump through or just shoving academia down your throat. This is so that you can communicate these ideas to me clearly. If you aren't able to do that, then I have no way of knowing that you understand this stuff. So concision and passive voice, these are important because when it comes to concision, if it takes me 5 sentences of reading to get information that you could have put in 1 sentence, you're making me work harder than I need to. And so your ideas are less likely to come across when you don't write concisely, when you write something that in 5 sentences you can write in 1 sentence. Furthermore, the assignments in this class are short. If you're given a 1.5 to 3 page assignment, the expectation is that that will be filled with a 1.5 to 3 pages of information, not 3/4 of a page of information ballooned up into unconcise language of 3 pages. Again, this makes it easier on your audience. So active and passive voice is another way to make it easier on your audience. If you write in passive, if you're writing in active voice makes it easier on your audience. For one, it's more engaging, and another, it's more concise. So what do I mean by active and passive voice? Let's look at a statement in passive voice and then in active voice. Let's take the statement, I am helped by him. Now in active voice, he helps me. In passive voice, it's kind of like saying the predicate is done by the subject, and in active voice you're saying the subject does the predicate. There's nothing grammatically wrong with passive voice. Sometimes it's necessary for effect, and sometimes it just sounds weird, too weird to not use passive voice. A poem written all in active voice would probably sound like crap. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with passive voice. It's just it's better in academic writing to stick to active voice. A simple way to remove as much active voice as you can would be to go through and find any conjugations of the verb to be, is, are, was, were, and see if they're necessary, and if you can say them a different way. And if you can do that, then you'll probably eliminate a sufficient amount of passive voice. And let's close with just some general pointers Again, I have a document in the course contents section called Writing Pointers that covers all of this and more. I strongly recommend you read that. Make a checklist, excuse me, for every portion or sub-portion of the assignment and go through the checklist as you're doing the assignment. Don't just throw quotations out without prefacing them. It's sloppy, and it usually doesn't demonstrate that you even understand the quotation that you're putting in there. It's just, here's a quotation from so-and-so, and it just looks like you're trying to fill up space, and it doesn't usually represent your understanding clearly. Avoid contractions, slang, informal language. Term papers usually require a formal, semi-formal tone. Read what you write out loud to yourself and to see if it makes sense. I have to do this, and I think it has to do with the different neural pathways in the brain. If I'm reading something, it's just going through the visual, the visual neural pathway to the language part of my brain. But if I say it, I'm getting the auditory, I'm getting the speech, and all of that's connected, and I get a more dynamic, multi-dimensional understanding of what I'm writing, and it comes out. I'm like, wow, that doesn't sound right. If that doesn't work, I understand some of us are better writers than others. So if that doesn't work, have someone else proofread your work for you. Bring it to me. I'll proofread your work for you if you bring it to me and give me enough time, if it's early enough. You can also contact the Writing Center at UWM, and I'm putting up a URL for that right now. And finally, don't refer to concepts or technology or terminology, without defining and explaining them. Pretend you're writing the paper for someone that doesn't have any knowledge of what you're talking about. Otherwise, I have no way of knowing that you understand what you're talking about. So don't say something like, this is a good example of Confucian ethics, and then don't say how. If it's just not clear in the context, if you don't define it, if you don't say how this is a good example of Confucian ethics, then you're just, to me, it's just going to look like you're concept dropping, you're name dropping, and it's not helpful. So that concludes the Writing Critical Thought and Analysis lecture. In summary, we looked at critical thought and analysis, how I define that. You make a statement, you provide a counter argument, you respond to that counter argument, you do this back and forth a sufficient number of times until you draw a conclusion. We went over validity and soundness, necessary and sufficient conditions, covered a number of fallacies, and concluded with writing pointers. I intend to have a few more lectures, or at least one more lecture on meta-theory, meta-ethical theories, and hopefully more on some of the topics we cover in other ethical theories. Thanks again for watching this lecture.